Could you imagine a world where love was a secret illness, where a grand declaration of affection could get you in serious trouble, where your own heart might not belong to you at all? Welcome to the High Middle Ages between the 11th and 14th centuries, a time when the rules of attraction were nothing like today. Number 9. The fateful gaze and love at first sight. In the High Middle Ages, the single look could set off a chain reaction that might last a lifetime, or at least feel like. This was not just a pleasant feeling. It was often described as a physical affliction, a wounding of the heart, or a sudden overwhelming sickness. People believed that love entered through the eyes, traveling directly to the heart. A swift glance, a fleeting observation of beauty, and suddenly you could find yourself completely undone, utterly captivated. It was rarely a slow burn. Instead, it was an immediate, almost violent, emotional takeover. A knight might be riding past a castle, catch a glimpse of a lady at a window, and his world would instantly shift on its axis. Her beauty, her grace, her noble bearing would imprint themselves on his soul, and from that moment on, his existence would be dedicated to her. This initial visual impact was paramount. It wasn't about getting to know someone's personality, their quirks, or their sense of humor first. It was about an almost primal response to physical appearance, often idealized and exaggerated in the mind of the beholder. The lady's beauty was a sign of her inner virtue, her nobility, and her worth. If a knight saw a lady of exquisite beauty, it was almost a spiritual command to devote himself to her. Troubadour poems from southern France, rich with lyrical descriptions of love and longing, frequently described this moment of first sight as the true beginning of all romantic agony and ecstasy. Poet often recounts the exact circumstances of the meeting, the setting, the specific details of the lady's appearance, her golden hair, her bright eyes, her slender form. It was a moment of vulnerability for the lover, as their heart was suddenly exposed and defenseless. They might feel a sudden heat, a chilling cold, a trembling or a strange weakness in their limbs. This was not merely poetic exaggeration. It was believed to be the actual physical manifestation of love's powerful onset. The eyes were seen as conduits not just for light, but for emotion, and even for the very essence of the beloved. When the lover looked upon the lady, her image, her very being, was said to penetrate their eyes and implant itself directly into their heart, where it would take root and begin to grow. This growth could be painful, a constant ache of longing, but it was also the source of all joy and inspiration. This initial spark often occurred in public settings, such as at a court gathering, a feast, or during a tournament, but the intensity of the experience was deeply personal. A lady might be attending a celebration, surrounded by other noble women, and a knight, perhaps one who had traveled far, would see her across the crowded hall. Her presence would overshadow everyone else. All other sounds might fade away, and his focus would narrow entirely on her. He might not even know her name, her lineage, or anything about her station, but the visual impression alone would be enough to ignite a profound devotion. This kind of instantaneous attraction was not trivial. It was presented as a profound, life-altering event, one that dictated the course of the lover's future actions. All subsequent deeds of chivalry, all poetic verses, all suffering and sacrifice, stemmed from this singular moment of initial sight. The medieval werewolf, heavily influenced by religious and philosophical thought, even had theories about how this ocular love worked. Some scholars spoke of spiritus or subtle spirits that emanated from the beloved's eyes and entered the lovers carrying the image of beauty into the heart. These spirits were like tiny messengers conveying the powerful essence of the beloved. Once these spirits had taken hold, the lover was truly smitten, and there was little they could do to resist the feeling. The onset of love was rarely a choice. It was more like a divine decree or a natural phenomenon, an uncontrollable force that seized control of the individual's will. It was not something you could simply turn off or ignore. Once you had seen your destined beloved, your heart was theirs, whether they knew it or not, whether they returned the feeling or not. This created an immediate sense of destiny and an intense, often immediate emotional entanglement. The feeling was so strong that it could lead to physical symptoms, like loss of appetite or sleep, an unshakable melancholy, or an overwhelming preoccupation with the beloved's image. The image of the beloved, once imprinted on the lover's heart, would remain there, a constant presence guiding their thoughts and actions. Number 8. The secrecy of the affair. Once the fateful gaze had cast its spell, the next crucial step in medieval courtship, particularly within the ideals of courtly love, was to shroud the entire affair in profound secrecy. This was not merely a romantic notion, but a practical necessity, often dictated by social constraints, family expectations, and the strictures of medieval morality. For many, especially those involved in courtly love, the object of affection was often a married woman, and the love itself was considered illicit, though noble in its own right, by its practitioner. If word of such a relationship got out, the consequences could be severe, ranging from social disgrace to physical danger, especially for the lady. Her reputation, her family's honor, and even her life could be at risk if the love affair became public knowledge. Therefore, discretion was not just a virtue. It was a fundamental rule, perhaps the most important one for survival, in this delicate dance of affection. The lover, typically a knight or a nobleman, had to conceal his deep feelings from almost everyone. He might carry a secret token from his lady, wear her colors in a tournament, or dedicate his deeds to her. But these gestures were often subtle enough to be ambiguous to outsiders, recognizable only to those truly in the know, or to the lady herself. The love affair was a whispered secret, a hidden pact between two hearts. This secrecy lent an air of mystery and excitement to the relationship, transformed ordinary interactions into coded messages, filled with glances, veiled words, and unspoken understandings. A simple greeting in a crowded hall could become a moment of profound intimacy if the hidden meaning was shared between the lovers. The thrill of forbidden affection was amplified by the constant danger of exposure. This very danger, rather than deterring the lovers, often intensified their feelings, forging a stronger bond through shared risk. The necessity of secrecy extended to the lover's behavior. He could not openly declare his passion, lest he bring ruin upon his lady. Instead, he had to express his devotion through subtle acts of service, through poetry that hinted at his feelings without naming names, or through extraordinary deeds of valor that could be interpreted as general chivalry, but were in his heart dedicated to her. He might compose psalms that praised a generalized lady of beauty and virtue, knowing that only his true beloved would understand the specific references. He might perform heroic feats in jousts or battles, attributing his strength to the inspiration of a nameless lady. But in his mind, and perhaps in hers, the specific identity was clear. The lover had to master the art of the veiled compliment, the discreet gesture, and the carefully chosen word, always navigating the treacherous waters of courtly society without capsizing the fragile ship of his love. Even the process of wooing had to be clandestine. Initial overtures were often made through trusted intermediaries, not directly by the lover himself. These go-betweens, usually loyal friends or chambermaids, would carry messages, gauge interest, and facilitate secret meetings. This added another layer of security and complexity to the courtship process. When meetings did occur, they were typically short, often at night, in secluded corners of the castle or in hidden gardens. The lovers risked everything for a few stolen moments of conversation, a shared glance or a gentle touch of hands. The moonlight, the shadows, the silence of the castle after everyone else had retired, these became the intimate witnesses to their clandestine affection. The very air seemed to hum with the unspoken words and emotions that dared not be voiced too loudly. This emphasis on hidden meetings made every interaction precious and fraught with tension, turning every shared breath into an illicit luxury. The danger of being discovered added a thrill that amplified the depth of their affection, proving their willingness to risk everything for the sake of their bond. Number 7. The role of the go-between. Navigating the intricate landscape of medieval courtship, especially when secrecy was paramount, often required the delicate touch of a third party. The go-between, this individual was not just a messenger but a crucial facilitator, a confidant, and sometimes even a negotiator between the lover and the beloved. Direct communication between a smitten knight and a high-ranking lady, especially a married one, was often impossible or highly inappropriate. The go-between bridged this social distance, carrying messages, testing the waters, and even providing strategic advice. They were the secret agents of love, operating in the shadows of courtly life, making connections that otherwise could not exist. Their role was vital for the entire process to unfold, as they provided a safe channel for the initial expressions of interest, the identity. If the go-between varied, for a knight, it might be a trusted squire, a loyal page, or a close male friend who understood the unspoken rules of courtly love. For a lady, it was almost always a chambermaid, a lady-in-waiting, or a trusted, older female relative, someone who was constantly by her side and privy to her private thoughts and movements. These intermediaries needed to possess absolute discretion, intelligence, and a keen understanding of human nature. They had to be able to read subtle cues, interpret veiled messages, and deliver their own communications with impeccable tact. A misstep, a careless word, or a moment of inattention could expose the entire affair and bring disaster upon the lovers. Their loyalty was tested daily, as they often found themselves in positions of great trust, holding secrets that could unravel reputations. The go-between's duties were multifaceted. Initially, they might simply observe, trying to gauge the lady's interest in the suitor. They might drop subtle hints, listen for comments, or report on her reactions to the knight's presence or action. If there was a glimmer of hope, they would then carry the first tentative messages. These messages were rarely direct declarations of love. Instead, they might be inquiries about the lady's health, a compliment about her beauty, or a request for a small favor. The go-between would carefully relay the words, but also the tone, the facial expressions, and the underlying emotions of the sender. When delivering their reply, they would bring back not just the lady's words, but her subtle cues, a blush, a hesitant smile, a lingering glance. These non-verbal signals were often more important than the spoken words, as they offered clues about the lady's true feelings and whether she was receptive to the knight's advances. Beyond carrying messages, the go-between might also arrange secret meetings. They would identify secluded spots, manage the logistics of getting the lovers together without arousing suspicion, and act as lookouts to ensure privacy. These meetings were often brief, filled with nervous excitement, and every second was precious. The go-between's presence was a constant reminder of the secrecy and the inherent risks. They would also help the lovers exchange tokens of affection, a ribbon, a flower, a piece of jewelry, a lock of hair, items that carried profound symbolic meaning but could easily be concealed or dismissed as innocent gifts. The go-between transformed these seemingly ordinary items into powerful symbols of a hidden passion. The success or failure of a courtly love affair often rested heavily on the skill and trustworthiness of these individuals, making them unsung heroes of medieval romance. Their ability to maintain a delicate balance between facilitating communication and safeguarding the lovers' reputations was an art form in itself. Without these loyal intermediaries, many a clandestine medieval romance would likely have been stillborn. Number 6. Service and suffering. Once the initial spark had ignited and the pathways of secret communication were established, the path of the lover in the High Middle Ages was one defined by unwavering service and profound suffering. This was not a quick, easy courtship. It was a long, arduous commitment, a test of devotion that demanded constant effort and often deep emotional and physical pain. The lover, typically a knight, adopted the role of a devoted vassal to his lady, much like a feudal lord serving a king. He dedicated his entire being to her, not just romantically, but in every aspect of his life. His existence became centered around pleasing her, proving his worth, and earning even the slightest sign of her favor. This was not a reciprocal relationship in the early stages. It was about the lover's selfless, unending dedication. He literally served his lady often without any guarantee of a return on his emotional investment. This service manifested in various ways. The knight would undertake great deeds in her name, endure hardships, and seek to elevate her status through his own achievements. He might fight bravely in battles, displaying extraordinary courage on the battlefield, knowing that his feats would reflect glory upon his lady. He might excel in tournaments, breaking lances and unseating opponents, all while wearing her colors or a token she had given him, tacitly dedicating his victories to her. The physical discomfort of war, the dangers of combat, the pain of wounds, these were all part of the suffering endured for her sake. He might even choose to live a life of asceticism, denying himself other pleasures, dedicating his entire focus to his singular devotion. This self-denial was seen as a way to purify his love, making it more noble and less about earthly desires. The suffering was not just a side effect, it was an integral part of the process, a testament to the depth and sincerity of his feelings. The emotional suffering was often depicted as even more profound than the physical. The lover endured constant longing, an aching desire for the lady's presence, her attention, or her affection. He might spend countless hours pining, writing poetry, or simply thinking of her, feeling a deep melancholy that pervaded his days and nights. This yearning was often unfulfilled, or only partially fulfilled, leading to a perpetual state of emotional anguish. The lady, often maintaining an aloof and distant demeanor to test his devotion, might purposefully withhold her favor, making him suffer more to prove his steadfastness. Her coldness, her indifference, or her outright refusal to acknowledge his love was a source of profound torment. He might feel despair, jealousy if she showed favor to others, or a gnawing sense of hopelessness. Yet through all this pain, the lover was expected to remain steadfast, his devotion unwavering. His suffering was a badge of honor, proof of his sincerity and the purity of his love. This concept of suffering for love was highly romanticized in medieval literature. Heroes like Lancelot often suffered greatly for their love of Guinevere, enduring perilous quests, facing impossible odds, and living with the constant agony of unfulfilled desire and illicit passion. Tristan's love for Isolde brought him endless pain and exile. Yet he never wavered in his devotion. This suffering was not seen as a weakness, but as a noble sacrifice, elevating the lover above ordinary men. It showed that his love was pure, not motivated by selfish desires or fleeting attractions, but by a deep, almost spiritual connection. The more he suffered, the more worthy he was of her love, and the more noble his affection became. This endurance of pain, both physical and emotional, was a fundamental pillar of medieval courtship, demonstrating a commitment that transcended mere words. It was a rigorous trial, and only the most dedicated lovers could pass it. Number 5. The lady's unattainability and power. In the High Middle Ages, the lady at the center of courtly affection was not merely a passive recipient of devotion. She was often portrayed as an elevated, almost divine figure, possessing immense power over her lover. This power stemmed primarily from her perceived unattainability. She was often of a higher social status, or perhaps already married, or simply maintained a cool, distant demeanor that tested her suitor's resolve. This aloofness was not a sign of disinterest, but a crucial part of the dynamic. The more unattainable she seemed, the more her favor became a precious, highly sought-after commodity, driving the lover to ever greater acts of devotion and sacrifice. Her elevated status made her an object of worship rather than just affection, turning the lover into a humble servant at her feet. The lady's power was absolute. She held the keys to the lover's happiness and despair. With a single glance, a slight smile or a brief word of encouragement, she could lift him to heights of ecstasy. Conversely, a frown, a dismissive gesture, or prolonged indifference could plunge him into the deepest pits of sorrow. She was the domina, the mistress, in the truest sense, possessing the authority to bestow or withhold her grace. This dynamic placed the lover in a position of humility and supplication. He was expected to beg for her favor, to prove his worthiness repeatedly, and to accept her every command without question. Her approval was the ultimate reward, and her displeasure was the ultimate punishment. This created an intense psychological pressure on the lover, constantly pushing him to strive for her acceptance. This unattainability was often deliberate. A lady might purposefully act cold or distant, not because she lacked feelings, but because it was part of the established game of courtly love. Her tests were designed to gauge the sincerity and depth of the lover's commitment. Could he endure her rejection? Would he give up easily? Only those who persevered through long periods of neglect and suffering were deemed truly worthy of her attention. She might demand impossible tasks, seemingly arbitrary acts of service, or simply endure his prolonged silence and devotion without offering any immediate signs of reciprocation. This testing period was essential for both parties. It confirmed the lover's dedication and allowed the lady to maintain her position of authority and desirability. It was a game of emotional endurance, with the lady setting the rules and the pace. The lady's beauty was often described as almost supernatural, a reflection of her inner purity and nobility. This heightened perception of her perfection further contributed to her powerful mystique. She was the embodiment of virtue, grace, and all that was desirable. The lover saw her as an ideal, a source of inspiration. For all his noble deeds, her very presence elevated his spirit and drove him to become a better man, a better knight. This idealization meant that the lady was often seen through a romanticized lens, almost as a goddess on earth, rather than a flawed human being. Her word was law, and her slightest wish was a command that the lover felt compelled to fulfill. The lady's unwavering control over the pace and intensity of the courtship meant that the lover was constantly striving, constantly proving himself, locked in a perpetual state of longing for her ultimate, often delayed acceptance. Number 4. The oath of fidelity and perseverance. Once a bond, however subtle or secret, had been established in medieval courtship. The lover was bound by a profound oath of fidelity and an unwavering commitment to perseverance. This was not a temporary infatuation. It was a lifelong dedication, a sacred pledge that transcended fleeting desires. The lover was expected to remain absolutely loyal to his chosen lady, come what may. This meant not only avoiding any other romantic entanglements, but also maintaining his devotion through all manner of obstacles, rejections, and protracted periods of waiting. The concept of fidelity in courtly love was often more rigorous than in many marriages of the time, demanding an almost spiritual adherence to a single object of affection. It was a test of character, a demonstration of the lover's steadfastness and integrity. This oath of fidelity was often self-imposed, arising from the depth of the lover's feelings rather than a formal vow. However, it was understood as a fundamental tenet of true love. A knight who abandoned his lady for another, or who allowed his affections to wander, was seen as fickle and unworthy. His love was deemed impure or superficial. The true courtly lover was constant, unwavering in his devotion, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable barriers. This loyalty was a key indicator of the nobility of his heart and the purity of his intentions. He might face temptations, opportunities for other alliances, or the allure of different beauties, but his commitment to his chosen lady remained absolute. He would resist all distractions, keeping her image and her wishes at the forefront of his mind. Perseverance was the practical application of this fidelity. Courtship in the High Middle Ages was rarely a swift process. It could involve years of unspoken longing, subtle gestures, and patient suffering. The lady, as discussed earlier, often maintained her distance and tested the lover's resolve. She might ignore him, refuse his advances, or subject him to prolonged periods of uncertainty. The lover was expected to endure all these trials without complaint, without giving up hope, and without letting his passion wane. He had to be prepared for the long game, understanding that the greatest rewards often came only after the longest and most arduous struggles. This meant suppressing any impulses to give up, to despair, or to seek an easier path. He was bound by his love to continue his service, to continue his suffering, and to continue hoping, no matter how distant the light at the end of the tunnel seemed. Stories of courtly love are filled with examples of this extreme perseverance. Knights would undertake dangerous quests, spend years in exile, or endure endless battles, all for the sake of their lady's eventual favor. Lancelot's decades of unwavering devotion to Queen Guinevere, despite her marital status and the many obstacles placed in their path, perfectly illustrates this rule. His loyalty never faltered, even when she seemed to reject him or when their love brought him immense pain. This steadfastness was seen as an intrinsic part of his nobility. It was not enough to feel love. One had to actively and consistently live that love through enduring commitment. The lover's ability to remain true, to continue striving, and to bear all hardship for his beloved was the ultimate proof of his genuine affection and the strength of his character. This unwavering resolve was not just admirable. It was a non-negotiable requirement for anyone hoping to achieve the idealized form of love. Number 3, the art of the grand gesture. Poetry, song, and gifts. While secrecy and suffering were often the hallmarks of medieval courtship, the lover was also expected to express his profound devotion through grand artistic gestures. This was where the High Middle Ages truly excelled in its romantic expression, giving rise to lyrical poetry, captivating songs, and meaningful gifts that transcended mere material value. These acts of artistic creation and generous giving were not just pleasantries. They were essential tools in the lover's arsenal, ways to declare his feelings, immortalize his lady, and prove the depth of his passion without always resorting to explicit spoken words. They were public displays of private adoration, carefully crafted to convey deep emotions, while often maintaining an air of ambiguity. The most famous practitioners of this art were the troubadours of Aquitania, southern France, and their counterparts, the Chiers, in the north. These poet-musicians composed elaborate songs known as cansos, dedicated to their ladies. These cansos were not simple folk tunes. They were complex poetic forms, often sung to accompanying instruments, like the lute or viol. The lyrics would praise the lady's unparalleled beauty, her virtues, her noble lineage, and the agony and ecstasy she inspired in the lover. While the lady's name was rarely mentioned directly, the intricate descriptions, the specific imagery, and the heartfelt emotion made it clear to whom the song was dedicated. These songs were often performed in court before the very lady they lauded, making the act a public declaration of devotion, yet still veiled enough to maintain plausible deniability. If necessary, the act of composing such a song, mastering its intricate meter and rhyme, and then performing it, was a significant display of skill, intellect, and intense emotional investment. It was an offering of the lover's very soul, expressed through art beyond song. Poetry flourished. Lovers would compose verses, sonnets, and longer poems that meticulously catalogued their lady's perfections and chronicled their own suffering and loyalty. These poems were often circulated among select members of the court, subtly spreading the lover's message and building a reputation for his devotion. The use of allegory, metaphor, and intricate symbolism was common, allowing the lover to express deep feelings without being overtly scandalous. A poem might speak of the rose or the star that guides him, when everyone in the know understood that the rose was a specific lady of the court. The craftsmanship of the poetry itself was a testament to the lover's worth, showing his refinement, education, and ability to articulate profound emotion. It was a way to transcend the ordinary and elevate love to an art form. Gifts were another crucial element of the grand gesture. These were not just practical items, but symbolic tokens of affection. A knight might present his lady with a finely embroidered scarf, a piece of intricate jewelry, or a rare falcon. Each gift carried meaning. The scarf might be worn during a tournament as a symbol of his dedication. The jewelry might be adorned with symbols only the two of them understood. The falcon represented power and nobility, reflecting the lady's own status. Ladies, in turn, might give their favored knight a small ribbon, a glove, a flower, or a lock of her hair. These love tokens were treasured possessions, worn close to the heart or carried into battle as talismans. They were tangible representations of the bond, a secret symbol of shared affection that only the lovers truly understood. The act of giving and receiving these gifts was imbued with deep emotional significance, solidifying the connection between the two individuals in a world where direct, overt expressions of love were often forbidden. These grand gestures were the canvas upon which medieval lovers painted their most profound emotions, creating a lasting legacy of their affection. Number 2. Chivalry and deeds of valor. For a knight in the High Middle Ages, one of the most powerful and public ways to demonstrate his worthiness and deep devotion to his lady was through acts of chivalry and daring deeds of valor. This was not just about being a good fighter. It was about embodying an entire code of conduct that blended martial prowess with moral virtue and courtly refinement. The knight's physical courage, his skill in battle, and his willingness to face danger were direct reflections of his love and dedication. He sought to prove himself worthy of his lady's favor, not just through words or songs, but through the crucible of combat and the rigors of knightly service. Every swing of his sword, every lance broken in a joust, every foe vanquished, was at its heart a silent declaration of his passion. Tournaments were prime arenas for this display of valor. A knight would enter the lists, often wearing his lady's colors, perhaps a ribbon tied to his helmet, a scarf draped over his shield, or the specific heraldic device of her family woven into his surcoat. As he charged into the fray, the cheers of the crowd, the clash of steel, and the thunder of hooves, he would perform feats of extraordinary bravery and skill, all dedicated to his lady. Unhorsing an opponent, breaking multiple lances, or winning a melee were not just personal victories. They were offerings to his beloved, a way of showering her with honor and glory through his own strength and courage. He would hope that she was watching from the stands, her heart perhaps swelling with pride, and that his victory would bring him closer to her favor. The physical pain and danger of these events were willingly embraced as they further proved the depth of his devotion and his willingness to suffer for her. Beyond the tournament grounds, actual warfare provided even greater opportunities for heroic deeds. A knight fighting in a skirmish, defending a castle, or participating in a siege would constantly think of his lady. Her image would inspire him to fight harder, to endure more, and to display unmatched bravery. Saving lives, capturing enemies, or leading a successful charge were not just military achievements. They were acts performed for her sake, to bring her honor and to enhance his own reputation as a worthy suitor. The dangers of battle, the risk of death, injury, or capture were seen as noble sacrifices made in the name of love. A knight's fame on the battlefield directly contributed to his desirability as a lover, demonstrating his strength, his courage, and his ability to protect and provide. Moreover, chivalry extended beyond mere fighting. It encompassed a broader code of conduct: courtesy, generosity, honor, and loyalty. A chivalrous knight was expected to defend the weak, protect women, uphold justice, and remain true to his word. These virtues, practiced in daily life, and especially during military campaigns, were also ways to impress his lady. A knight who treated prisoners honorably, who was generous to his squires, or who upheld his oaths, showed himself to be a man of integrity and noble character, qualities highly valued by noblewomen. His good reputation, built on a foundation of chivalrous deeds, would precede him and speak volumes about his inherent worthiness as a lover. The grandest gestures were not just about personal courage. They were about embodying the complete ideal of knighthood, all for the sake of earning a single lady's irreplaceable affection. Number 1. The distinctions courtly love vs. marriage. Perhaps the most startling rule of courtship in the High Middle Ages, especially from a modern perspective, was the stark and often contradictory distinction between courtly love and the institution of marriage. For many in the nobility, these were not two sides of the same coin, but rather two separate, often opposing concepts. Marriage, particularly among the upper classes, was primarily a strategic alliance, a political or economic arrangement designed to consolidate power, secure lands, forge alliances between families, or produce heirs. Courtly love, on the other hand, was an idealized, passionate, and often secret affair that was thought to exist outside the bonds of marriage, sometimes even in direct opposition to it. Marriages were typically arranged by parents or guardians, when the prospective bride and groom were often still children, or at least very young adults. The factors like wealth, lineage, feudal obligations, and military advantage were paramount. The individuals involved often had little to no say in the matter. Love, if it developed at all, was a happy accident, not a prerequisite. The purpose of marriage was pragmatic: to secure a stable lineage, to manage property, and to maintain social order. The Church recognized marriage as a sacrament, but its practical application in noble society was often far from a romantic ideal. Husbands and wives might live together and fulfill their duties, but emotional intimacy or passionate attachment was not necessarily expected or even desired. Loyalty was primarily to the family and its interests, not necessarily to the spouse's individual heart. Courtly love, however, presented a radically different vision of affection. It was depicted as a pure, intense, and ennobling emotion that could only thrive when unburdened by the practical necessities and obligations of marriage. Some influential medieval texts even argued that true love could not exist within marriage, because marriage was based on obligation, duty, and often coercion. While true love had to be freely given and freely felt, the act of loving within marriage was seen as less virtuous because it was a prescribed duty, not a choice born of unbridled passion. This perspective meant that many courtly love affairs were by definition adulterous, involving a knight and a married noblewoman. This paradox was central to its mystique and inherent tension. The high stakes of such a forbidden love, the secrecy, the suffering, and the grand gestures were all heightened by its illicit nature. The lover in a courtly relationship was expected to serve his lady with absolute devotion, to suffer for her, and to undergo great trials to prove his worth, all without the expectation of marriage or even a publicly recognized relationship. The rewards were often intangible: a secret smile, a stolen moment, a token of affection, or the pure joy of the love itself. This profound distinction meant that a person might live their life in an arranged marriage, fulfilling their societal duties, while simultaneously pursuing a deeply felt, highly idealized, and secret courtly love. This dual existence was common in medieval courts, where the two forms of relationship existed side by side, each serving different yet equally important roles in the lives of the nobility. The rules of one did not apply to the other, creating a complex and often dramatic landscape for romantic pursuits in the High Middle Ages.